Welcome to How I Built My Fundraising Consultancy, the stories behind the people driving results in the nonprofit sector.
Across the course of my career, people were often speaking to my innovations, and I was associated with a number of innovations that went on to become standard practice in higher education and in fundraising. Just again, by listening, most of my innovations actually came not from brainstorms in the middle of the night, but by doing a lot of research and really listening at a deeper psychological level to what was going on and what people wanted.
Today in the show is Jim Langley, president of Langley Innovations, which he started 8 years ago. Prior, he worked at a variety of colleges and universities. You can find more information about Langley Innovations at www.langleyinnovations.com. Here's my interview with Jim. I'm here today with Jim Langley of Langley Innovations. Welcome.
Thank you, Tim.
So you've been running this business now for about 8 years now. Can you speak a little bit about why you started Langley Innovations?
Well, like a lot of entrepreneurs, I saw a gap in the marketplace based on what I had learned as a sitting vice president at three different institutions, and as a vice president who was very much research oriented, and as time went on, oriented toward more and more behavioral science and behavioral research. I started to see a growing disparity between the business of fundraising, which was about getting money for institutional purposes, and the trends of philanthropists who were more and more wanting to make a difference, wanting to see an impact. And then I started to see what was at the heart of individual philanthropic propensities. And so what I saw, Tim, was a potential for an alignment of interest between targeted institutional aspirations and strong individual philanthropic propensities. And then I started looking for leaders and organizations, good causes and good people who would realize that this new set of opportunities would make us all stronger and actually lead to more good being done in the world and more impact in areas of great human import, which would in turn increase their ability to secure funds in the future and to raise their reputational flag and to strengthen their relevance.
Okay. And your experience largely was in the education sector, University of Massachusetts, Georgia Tech, University of California, Georgetown University, a lot of different universities. What key takeaways did you learn from your time at the various schools that you're now taking into your consultancy?
Well, one of the things that we learned, of course, as we looked at donor behaviors is that donor behaviors are not defined by the kind of institutions with which they affiliate. So someone who gives to an institution of higher learning and someone who gives, let's say, to a particular nonprofit that's community-based is not a different kind of donor. They may have different motivations. They may be looking at realizing certain objectives by giving through various organizations, but their primary motivations are not different. The way they behave in response to certain messages isn't different, and the way they behaved, if retained as loyal donors, isn't different. And so while I specialized in higher education, I came to realize that that knowledge was applicable to virtually any philanthropy-seeking organization.
And as you approach different nonprofits, do you see different struggles that they're facing from a resources standpoint? I know a lot of universities are very well-funded fundraising departments.
Yes, I think the single greatest challenge I see across the board is focus on one-year objectives, and sometimes because the needs are acute, and I don't mean just the needs of the nonprofit, but those that they're serving. And so they tend to focus on one-year objectives. And we try to show them how important it is to understand that the rhythms of true philanthropy are slower than we would like, but more certain if we will respect them. And we try to get them to realize that they can never accomplish as much in 1 year as they might, particularly if they proceed in too urgent a fashion, but they can achieve far more in 3 to 5 years than they ever thought possible if they will focus, stay on task, and bring in donors and volunteers with the right background in the right way. So we try to broaden their horizons and get them to realize that sometimes you just have to sit tight for a year, address fundamentals over time, and then with time you will greatly strengthen your ability to serve those greater needs.
I was looking a bit into your website, and it appears that your consultancy has shifted from being focused solely on fundraising, feasibility, and campaign readiness exploration to now include a comprehensive model of strategic resource development. Was that through client feedback that you decided to expand into this?
That's right, Tim. It was both through client feedback and as we looked at the situation to realize it was essentially the same process. If we're helping a nonprofit or if we're helping a university, let's say with a particular initiative, and let's just say for the sake of discussion that that's a medical initiative and may have something to do with addressing an ailment that affects a lot of families and they're verging on some new discoveries and some new treatments, that the process that we recommend they go through in articulating the impact they've had, in projecting the impact that they could have, and then specifying where exact levels of investment will yield specific impacts is also a very viable strategy in working with funding organizations, in working on contracts, and in general, securing the resources that you need to realize that part of your mission. We came to realize that there's also an interplay. Let's say a university has received a grant from the federal government. That actually makes that initiative more attractive to private donors because someone else has invested, provided core funding, and then the individual investor sees a chance to leverage his or her investment to stretch it by adding money to funds being contributed elsewhere. So we also saw this potential for synergy and interplay between all sources of funding if we but helped institutions communicate those successes to other potential funders. We could see the synergy starting to unfold.
You've been running your business for about 8 years now. What do you believe helps you stand apart from other consultancies out there? What services do you really excel at?
I think we excel at the sort of deep understanding of philanthropic psychology and how that then can be understood to help individual institutions advance their mission. So whereas many firms are more or less in the mass marketing of fundraising, we're in the micro-targeting. We're particularly good at helping an institution define a big, broad, sweeping, high-impact initiative, build a coalition of support around that initiative by actually interviewing potential stakeholders well in advance of asking them for support. So we really kind of flip the traditional case for support on its head. We don't write it in splendid isolation and then spring it on the unsuspected. We bring in stakeholders and end users in the design of the initiative. We get them to contribute their talent and insight. We get the client to incorporate what's reasonable. And then when we play back the potential of this initiative to those stakeholders, they see themselves and their purposes in it more rapidly. So by challenging long-held assumptions about how an institution makes a case, how it engages its prospects, by engaging in what I'll call acts of aggressive persuasion rather than active listening, we have come up with this method that is more certain, more graceful, and yields more consistently strong results. We don't like having clients out there with a begging bowl collecting a lot of no's. So we say, if you will rethink the process and rethink the traditional assumptions of fundraising and start by listening and then create we the people scenarios in pursuit of more perfect institutions and initiatives, you'll actually get to a better place and a more certain place. So, Tim, in that sense, it's very consistent with what people are learning from, say, crowdfunding. And crowdfunding works when it's preceded by crowdsourcing. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's really not an institution trying to sort of foist an idea that it's conceived on potential donors as much as it is really sourcing the idea developing a consensus around it to the extent possible, and then using the continuation of that dialogue to secure support. And one final point I'd make is that this is proving increasingly efficacious with entrepreneurial philanthropists who, of course, made their money by finding gaps in the marketplace, by developing business plans and securing support for them, and then showing a return on investment. These are people who want to be engaged early, who want to help you see where the gap is, help you find the solution to meeting that gap, and want a business plan and want you to project where the societal returns will be. So when you go about it in a way that is really much more true to how people make decisions and entrepreneurs think about the difference they make, you see a more certain rate of return and you see higher levels of giving by creating a more fundamentally sound process. So I think that's what we've done, is to use what we've understood about donor psychology at the deepest level, apply it to both institutions and particular kinds of donors, and then use it to build these coalitions of support.
Is part of your process training the staff what questions to ask and what approach to take during these discovery discussions with their supporters?
It is indeed, and we've developed what we call a forensic interview. And this is a result in part of the work that we did at Georgetown University, in which we had students interview 7,000 alumni face-to-face, and then we taught other institutions how to do that. And in the process, what we learned is that by asking certain questions in certain ways and in a certain order, we could actually start to see what was beating in the heart of individual philanthropists, what was behind their intention to make a difference, where did it come from, and even help them understand themselves. So we've now been able to develop a forensic interview, which can be used in the discovery process to sort of build this philanthropic profile, not in a devious way, not in a sub rosa way, but in open collaboration with the donor, so that the institution can put an idea in front of him or her that resonates with those pre-existing values and passions. And that's proven to be a hugely effective tool that we also think is a great competitive advantage.
When you get all this data back, is your consultancy a part of the analysis to carry on to the next step of figuring out what to do with all this feedback you get?
That's right, Tim. So we do this findings and recommendations report. So we help them gather the data, and we, of course, look at data on our own. And then together we come up with these findings and recommendations where we show them where the openings are, where the gaps are in their current set of relationships, where given their core competencies, they could attract additional support. And then for each client, we do these highly customized recommendations and strategies, because given the age of an organization, given the location of an organization, given the mission of an organization, it can have a very different strategic path and therefore a very different philanthropic path going forward. So we actually try to be that strategic pathfinder that says, of all the things you could do within the time and resources you have and the competencies of your organization, these are the next best steps you could take, why, and how you'll measure success. So that's what we take great pride in, is that customized path for each client that really is based on their unique characteristics.
I was looking over your website. You have a large client list. As far as capacity, what is your capacity as far as many clients you can work with, and how do you scale up and down as you get more and less business throughout your consultancy?
So two parts of our business. One is the active consulting, the active interacting with clients over time, and then the other is training, and often that training is on-site and, again, customized to the individual needs. So many of the organizations you saw on our website engaged us to help them train them according to the precepts that we discussed earlier and define that customized path going forward. And in many cases, they lead to these ongoing relationships. But what we've actually tried to do is to contain the volume of clients in return for long-term relationships. We believe the greatest service rendered is over time, is by working with clients over time to integrate knowledge, to help them assimilate, adjust, and adapt. and to really work with them over time, and with time sort of drill down from major barriers to minor barriers, or major opportunities to just building fundamental strength. So we don't aspire to have a large number of clients. We aspire to develop these relationships over time. We've lost very few clients in the course of 8 years, and where we've lost clients, I think, is where they simply may have been jarred by our recommendations or been sensitive to them, although we always try to deliver the message as diplomatically as we could.
Is the board where you run into the most problems?
What we've learned is that the key is to work our way up the food chain to the board, because if we don't get to the board, there is not a consistent means of evaluating the progress of fundraising or the overall functions of advancement. So I liken it to being in a war and having the generals on a different map, all harboring a different battle strategy, and you can imagine what happens. So what we try to do in working with the client and deepening those relationships is to get to the board, not only to the leaders of the organization, but get to the board and lay out these precepts. What is philanthropy? How does fundraising enable it? How has your organization done? Are you committed to the long-term approach to philanthropy? If you're not, you're always lurching from goal to goal. And so when we can get to the board, when we can present data to them and show them the basis for our recommendations, we actually see them come around and join forces with the president and with the advancement staff. And where we don't, we see the president and the advancement staff getting whipsawed by the sort of theory of the day. You need to be more aggressive. You need to get people who have stronger relationships with the wealthy. You need to be online more. All these theories that are in part wrong but disembodied from larger strategies get thrust at the president, the advancement operation, and they try to please the board, react to board suggestions, and sometimes veer away from the more fundamentally sound approaches that we put forward. So that's a very perceptive question, Tim. It's really getting all key players around the same conceptual map as to what philanthropy is and how fundraising either nurtures it or fights it. And a surprising result is that so many fundraising practices take advantage of the good nature that philanthropy constitutes, but really don't strengthen it, don't resupply it, don't make it more sustainable. We can actually show that in many cases people give despite what's done in the name of fundraising, not because of it, because they believe in the mission of the institution. So when the fundraising practices are actually more nurturing of true philanthropy, you can see more dramatic results.
Is a consultancy just yourself, or do you have other partners you work with?
We have a number of partners, about 6 or 7, and it's a stable of professionals. But one of the most valuable pieces of advice that I gleaned when I started was affiliate, don't acquire. That if you try to acquire all of the talent and manage all the talent and put it on your payroll and provide everyone benefits, you have to pass on those costs to your clients. But if you affiliate with small businesses, individual practitioners, people who might want to put up their own signal and serve as a general contractor, so that you can say to each client, I'm bringing forth the best people we can find to suit your specific needs, it actually gives you a great competitive advantage. So I can put different teams together for different clients based on the long-term relationships I have with people who've been in this business a long, long time and have proven themselves in a variety of situations. So many of them are of counsel. In other words, they're individual practitioners who will then work with me, and in some cases, I with them, to help individual clients. So it's a different kind of construction that keeps our overhead low, but allows us to really customize our approach. That said, I have 6 or 7 people who work with me on virtually every single relationship and with every client, because we enjoy working together. We're kindred spirits. And so it is very much like a team that I can depend on and call on when needed.
How did you go about finding these affiliates that you're working with?
Well, so many of them I've known over the course of my life. Some of them have worked for me in earlier iterations of my career.
Hmm.
I have presented with them, or they were my clients when I first started, and also did some consulting when I was a sitting vice president with the permission of my bosses. I was always keeping my eye out for leading practitioners and those who I would consider kindred spirits. And by that, I mean people who took the long view, the fundamentally sound view, who wanted to make sure that fundraising practices were non-exploitive and ethical as a way of really preserving philanthropic trust over time. So when I met people who were both kindred spirits and strategically expert and tactically sound, I just developed relationships with them and kept in touch with them because I always had this feeling that somehow there was a movement afoot and a way of working together to ensure that philanthropy would have a higher impact on the human condition if we just went about it the right way.
In the beginning, did you need to make any financial investments in getting the consultancy started?
Oh, yeah, it's just the hardest thing, and every consultant will tell you essentially the same story, is that all of a sudden you're seeing a lot of outlays. You're seeing outlays of $20, $30, $40, $50,000 a month, as you acquire talent, as you respond to clients and contracts, as you start to book travel for yourself and multiple parties across North America, or even as you pursue business and start to absorb the cost.
Mm-hmm.
And so even though I had put away money, I had the traditional story of consuming everything I had in reserve, maxing out my credit cards, taking money out of my retirement. But every time I did, it was because the volume of business was growing. I wasn't speculating.
Yeah.
I was trying to reinvest in the quality of the products and services that I was providing. So I was always taking whatever profit margin I had and trying to plow it back into this greater vision of what we could be. For the first 3 or 4 years, you're taking every opportunity that comes your way, one day here, one day there. You're stretching yourself thin, you're stretching your resources thin. But I saw the glimmer of what could be. Now I'm in a position where I have these clients who retain me year after year. I start each year with about 60% of my time already retained by long-term clients, and then I can really pick and choose my spots, looking for companies or looking for organizations and people in whom I believe. I have to believe in them and their mission.
Yeah.
And I just don't shop myself to anybody who's out there. I don't have to, and that's a huge privilege.
So the bulk of the expense in the beginning was travel and landing these different clients that you have now?
And some marketing kinds of things, including getting a website up, producing certain kinds of materials and publications, maybe even funding your way to travel out to conferences to speak, maybe putting up promotional materials at conferences, those kinds of things. I started generating business in Canada. You are starting to talk about, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 a month just in travel.
Do you have a certain graphic designer or like page layout person you like to work with to create your marketing materials?
I do, but I have stable writers, researchers, graphic designers, and in each case I have my preferred person who I won't name by name.
Oh, sure.
But I do for the same reason, is that I've seen their work, I know what they can do, and I can say to my clients with utter confidence that they will deliver and they will do so in a distinct way. It's just something that was slowly acquired over time. Again, in most cases was the result of eyeballing people that I worked with 5, 6, 10, 15 years ago and just keeping in touch with them because I saw how capable they were. And now I can call on them and say, what do you think about this contract? What do you think about this assignment? I think they know by now that if that client has come on board, they've bought into a kind of an approach and a philosophy. They're innovative, they're creative, and they're really turning to us for that extra insight and sheen on their thoughts. So I don't have any trouble keeping those folks occupied or keeping them loyal to this overarching enterprise.
How'd you come up with the name Langley Innovations?
So again, the advice I got from people was leverage your name. If you've built a positive reputation over the course of your career, don't lose that. And then take the word that people most often associate with you. So across the course of my career, people were often speaking to my innovations, and I was associated with a number of innovations that went on to become standard practice in higher education and in fundraising, just again by listening. Most of my innovations actually came not from brainstorms in the middle of the night, but by doing a lot of research and really listening at a deeper psychological level to what was going on and what people wanted. But I have to say, Tim, that in retrospect, it was a mistake as a startup company to use the word innovation, because although it was associated with me and I was quite proud of that, word scares a lot of people. What you'll discover is a lot of clients go, what do you mean? Nobody's done this before? I want proof points. I want to know who else has done this. Very often we were putting forward ideas saying you could be the first to do this. The research shows that there's a wide open opportunity here. Some people jump at it and some people are terrified. So at the beginning, that was a little bit like risk. When I said innovation, people heard risk. And then we had to prove over time that that was not the case.
Is there anything you'd change in retrospect, looking back now? You had to start the business over again, besides the name of the company. Is there anything else you'd maybe change?
Yeah, and I would say this to everybody: be prepared to meet people where they are. While you may have an underpinning philosophy, you don't sell a philosophy, you sell something far more practical, and that is results. And people are under pressure, or people want to do a good job because they believe in their mission. And so they really turn to consultants to get strategic or tactical. And I think I was guilty of selling a kind of a philosophy without showing that the right way was the best way. I kept focusing on the right way. And what I learned is you really have to tell people what the best way is, and then they can conclude that ethical orientation and being accountable and valuing loyalty leads to better results. But you have to flip it and let them draw that conclusion and see the power of that, rather than selling the philosophy and hoping they see the strategies and tactics. We had to reverse it.
When we return, a quick lightning round with Jim. First, quick break where you'll learn how to download a free ebook from us here at MarketSmart. Today's free resource offer is the ebook Are You Ready for a Capital Campaign?, which you can download right now at imarketsmart.com/areyouready. That's www.imarketsmart.com/areyouready. Here's what you'll learn by reading this book. You'll discover the elements of a strong capital campaign foundation. You'll access a capital campaign readiness questionnaire and preparation checklist. You'll discover the kinds of plans needed to run a successful campaign, and much more. Visit imarketsmart.com/areyouready to download your copy. That's www.imarketsmart.com/areyouready. With that, let's get to the lightning round with Jim.
What's the best piece of business advice you've ever received?
The one I mentioned earlier is affiliate, don't acquire. And I'd say the second best piece of advice is be true to your clients, provide the best service that you can for them.
What piece of advice would you have given yourself as a 25-year-old?
That it takes 30 years to establish a reputation that will then allow you to have a very rewarding career in later life.
What book would you recommend to those getting started?
A book, I may not have the exact title, but it's something like Charity, Philanthropy, and Civility in American Society. It's actually a book about the history of philanthropy in the U.S. And I think we really need to understand the roots of this remarkable philanthropic culture and not dwell as much on the tactics of fundraising.
What's your favorite personal productivity habit?
Be productive as early as possible. Don't react to the email in the order that it comes. Set my agenda for what I want to do first, and then react in the afternoon and the evening. Initiate in the morning, react in the afternoon and evening.
Do you have a favorite monthly subscription or service you're signed up for?
I'm a broad reader, so I would say, again, what I value most is broad understanding, but I would say the Harvard Business Review would be my favorite subscription in terms of honing strategic thinking.
What's an interesting or fun fact about you that most people don't know?
My parents began their careers as Shakespearean actors, and that exposure to language proved to me for me, a lifelong enrichment.
And what's one of your most important passions outside of work?
Golf, it's a spiritual exercise for me. There's something about being outside and trying to understand the analytics of a golf swing and trying to connect with a ball that I find both immensely frustrating and profoundly relaxing.
Do you have a favorite word?
Persist.
Desk or car, what would you clean first?
Desk.
And if you went to a zoo, what animal would you go and see first?
Otters. They put me in a good mood.
Tea or coffee?
Coffee.
What do clients never ask you that you wish they did?
Why do people give? What's the deepest why? What motivates this particular person to give? What can we see in them? What's the backstory, the human story as to why they give?
What are the best nonprofits doing right?
I haven't done a complete analysis of those, and so I would be tended to mention my clients. But the Strathmore Music Center in Rockville, Maryland, is one of those that has a deep valuing of its client base, of its constituents, that listens very carefully to them and tries to then put forward better services on their behalf. And that's the one that comes to mind. Now, I do look at satisfaction of nonprofits across the country, and I do see an authenticity index that when people believe that it hasn't gotten too fancy pants and stays true to itself, that it remains in high regard. And so you see things like the Girl Scouts for professional staff and the Salvation Army, and those that sort of maintain their authenticity and low overhead, preserve philanthropic regard over time.
What charities do you admire or support?
Well, I support the Unitarian Church. I support the Boys and Girls Club. I support things like the local YWCA. Those would be common themes with me, would be children, community, and we the people working together toward common ends. So anytime I see that in any charity, I'm drawn to it.
And where can people find more information about your services?
On our website, which is now being redesigned, which is www.langleyinnovations.com. And with my partner, Patrick Sells, I've also started a new online training service, which is www.langley-sells.com. And I would invite your listeners to look at both and would be grateful if they did.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Jim, for your time today. It's been fantastic speaking with you.
Thank you, Tim. I'm very grateful for your time and great questions.
Thanks for listening to this episode of How I Built My Fundraising Consultancy, presented by MarketSmart. If you like the show, make sure to review it on iTunes and pass it along to a colleague. If you're curious about what we do, make sure to check out iMarketSmart.com, and don't forget to download the Are You Ready for a Capital Campaign ebook by going to www.iMarketSmart.com/areyouready. Thanks for listening.